Xie Joan, thank you. Da Jia Hao, Huan Ying Ni Man Lai, Tan Jia, Zhong Wen, Yu Yan, Zhoude, Ho Dong. Hello and welcome to the Chinese Language Week events here at the library. So we have 3 events this week. There's the talk here by Richard, and then tomorrow, Duncan Campbell from the Confucius Institute at Victoria University will talk about the diversity of the spoken languages of China and the historical development of a single written script. He's actually in the audience at the moment. And on Friday, Stan Chan will give a Chinese brush painting demonstration of calligraphy and Chinese art. So all of these events will be in this room at 12:10. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Richard Foy. So Richard is a friend of the National Library and Archives New Zealand. He's the Director of Digital Strategy for the Information and Knowledge Services branch of the Department of Internal Affairs, which is home to the National Library and Archives New Zealand. His recent work, leading the thinking about our digital future, has brought him into personal contact with some of the stories, secrets and treasures in the care of these institutions. So today he's going to share with us some of those deeply personal stories and secrets that he's discovered as he explores the origins of his family roots here in New Zealand. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Inga mana, inga reo, inga rora, inga terama. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Aotearoa te whenua, ko Rimataka te maunga, ko Arongarongo te awa, no Wanyamata ahau. Ko Ngāti Siyip toku iwi, ko Wong Chun toku hapu, ko Wong toku whanau. Ko Wong Akso toku te puna, no hina ie. Ko Wong Gokwhi toku ingoa te hina. Ko Richard Foy ahau. No mai haere mai, ke te puna mataranga o Aotearoa. Ke tēnei hui mahana kei te whakanui nā reo o hina. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. This is a hard bit, which is ni men hao, ni hao ma. It's about the limit of it. So it's probably with a little bit of irony and a tinge of sadness and probably a little bit of personal shame that I can introduce myself and welcome you better in Te Reo Māori than I can in Siyip Cantonese. But I extend to you a very warm welcome to the National Library of New Zealand, to this talk today that I'm giving, which is part of a series this week to celebrate New Zealand Chinese Language Week, which until I got invited to do this, I didn't even know was a thing. So that's absolutely fantastic that you're all able to be here. There's 2 more seats at the front, 2 there, a couple there, if you need a seat. So thanks for the very lovely introduction, Emaratna. And as you mentioned, I do actually work for the Department of Internal Affairs as the Director of Digital Strategy. And that means actually I spend an awful lot of time thinking and working with these 2 great, venerable and really valuable institutions of New Zealand, the National Library of New Zealand and the National Archives. And you know, this isn't really a story about them directly, but they are very major characters in the stories that I'm going to tell you today. And it's fair to say that through my contact with the wonderful staff in both these institutions, the treasures that are held within these institutions, that I've actually gained quite a lot of fondness and affection. Dare I say, I love the National Library and the National Archives. But that's probably as much as I'm going to say. They're going to keep popping up throughout this talk, though. I'm going to start just a little bit with a bit of introduction about who I am and where I'm from. So you would have heard that I come from Wainyamata. And Wainyamata is probably a little bit unusual for a lot of places because it hasn't probably seen the kind of rampant rampant kind of price rises. So you can actually get, I'm not a real estate agent, but I think you can get quite good, reasonably priced accommodation and housing there. I grew up in my formative years in the 70s and 80s in Wainuiomata. I couldn't find a picture of me from the 70s. See, nowadays there's like so many photos, selfies, Instagrams, Facebooks that you could probably find a picture of you at any time in your life. I couldn't find a picture of myself when I was at school in the 1970s. But 1980s, that's me. I was a bit of a nerd, apparently. Actually, by the way, this was probably actually a really seminal moment because I was a teenager here. It was probably 1983. My first love was probably not a girl. It was probably a computer. That's an Apple IIe, by the way, 64K of memory. MOS technology, 6502A processor, 1 megahertz single core. External floppy, 5¼ inch floppy drive, running Apple DOS 3.3. It was one sweet rig. But that was then. I mean, I've grown up clearly, okay, because this is me now, so right. But a lot of interesting things came out of Wainuiomata. A lot of cool people. Tana Umanga. Now, if he had a movie, I'd watch that. Okay, former captain. Chloe Reeves. I don't know if many people remember Chloe Reeves. She was kind of it was a little bit unfortunate, but she put Wainuiomata on the map. And unfortunately, she gained a degree of notoriety and infamy through the Heartlands show that Gary McCormick made. But also the Foys. My family came from Wainuiomata. My mother, Jean and Charles Foy, and my dear older brothers, Les, Colin and Stephen, in that order. Now, people always say that my brothers and we all look alike. So I just thought, just as a bit of a shortcut, or I'll use this visual shortcut to help throughout this presentation so that it just makes it, because seeing a lot of Chinese people and Chinese faces can be quite confusing sometimes. So I'm just going to use these guys to represent my brothers. So that was, up until the late 60s, my brothers, and there's, first, second, third. It's very important to get the order in a Chinese family. And my parents, they did a really good job of raising those three boys, Les, Colin and Stephen, but they thought, we can do better than that. We can do better. So I was born in 1969, and then they thought, nah, not doing that again. And I was the youngest, so I was quite a bit the youngest. So I was about 9 years younger than my next brother, Stephen. And I consider I was kind of treated like the runt of the litter. I was kind of like the Tyrion Lannister of the Foys. So, not exactly, I was a little kid. Being Chinese in the 70s and 80s was a very interesting and very formative time, obviously, for any child during that time. But it came with a lot of bad stuff as well as some good stuff. Now, that is an assumption that I'm actually Chinese. I will provide a little bit of evidence because I am actually Chinese. That's why I think I got asked to give this talk. Here's a picture of me. I've got all the telltale signs. I used to have black hair, but there, black hair, very brown eyes. I had to wear glasses from a very early age, and I was very studious. I say I'm geeky too, but my brothers are not geeky, so that's clearly not an Asian or Chinese trait. Anyway, so yeah, I'm very much Chinese, and there weren't a lot of role models for young boys growing up in Wainuiomata in those days. Clearly, there was Bruce Lee, and he was a very, very powerful role model for me, and probably for a lot of guys, a lot of kids. He was a cool Asian dude. And although, I couldn't really do kung fu like him, I did try very hard to speak like him. And it was a very useful technique when you're faced with schoolyard bullies who would taunt you for being Chinese, because you could just sort of, instead of executing a finely punched, thing to the solar plexus, you instead would execute a perfect impression of Bruce Lee. It's like a finger pointing at the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory. And whilst your schoolyard bully is looking at all that heavenly glory, you leg it and get out of there. So it's a very powerful thing. Probably doesn't work for everybody. Another powerful role model with these guys, and in particular that guy there. Now, some of you won't recognise these people. You'll recognise these people. These were the olden day versions of those other people, right? And in particular, I'm talking about Hikaru Sulu, or Lieutenant Sulu, because he was actually a role model for not just Asian males, but Asian females, all Asians, because he represented the galaxy's best driver, such that he was allowed to pilot the Starship Enterprise, the flagship of Starfleet. You don't get to do that unless you're a very good driver, okay? Another role model for me, actually no, that's silly, it's not Darth Vader, because I do not follow Darth Sith Lords. I'm more of a Jedi. And actually, if there are any Star Wars nerds out there, it's okay. I know this is from the prequels and not from the original trilogy, but I didn't want to say that I had a Muppet as a role model. But anyway, there were some anti-role models though growing up, and some of you might recall this. This is a guy, David Carradine, who played Kane in the television series Kung Fu in the early 70s. That was meant to be Bruce Lee's breakout television role, and he stole it from him. And he's, he to me is a white dude kind of pretending to be an Asian brother. Having said that, I did read up about him. I mean, apparently he played a half Chinese, half American guy, so that's probably okay. You can put on those robes. Nowadays, Asian culture's been co-opted all over the place. In fact, there's a film coming out next year by Zhang Yimou. It's about the Great Wall and dragons, and Matt Damon's in there. Because he's got to help my Asian brothers fight the dragons. But that's okay, because I love Matt Damon, and so he can be in there. But as I was saying, there are some pretty dark moments growing up in Wainyamata, and I've never really talked about this with my brothers, and they never really talked to me about it either. They didn't talk to me a lot when I was growing up. But there were some kids that I absolutely were fearful of walking past when I was growing up, because they would look at me and they'd do the bow thing, and they would go, and I'll sing this, Ching Chong Chinaman, ah so, which, I never knew if they were saying, ah so, or calling me something. But, to have that as a kind of not regular, but certainly not irregular occurrence in the street, just walking to school in the playgrounds. Yes, I don't know. I don't know about you, but that's kind of like tantamount to racism. That wasn't very nice. But anyway, one of the things I was thinking about talking about today, interesting, was the fact that, and as a title, that my father was an alien. Well, in fact, he was a registered alien, according to the Aliens Act of 1948. And that's kind of a funny thing. Alien's not a term we tend to use very much here in New Zealand, but it was certainly a term used in earlier immigration policy and history. And you hear it in the United States a lot. Here's his certificate of registration. Something's interesting, some identity details, that's not unusual. But here's a whole bunch of stuff which has all his addresses over a span of time, actually until the 60s. And actually, if you zoom in here and have a look, my father, being a registered alien, he had to notify the authorities if he was going to change job or change address. Within 14 days, he had to tell them about that, the nearest police station. He also had to produce this document when it was requested. So I don't know, things have moved on, thankfully, but they were pretty stark times, I think, for Chinese, even in the 50s and 60s. But this isn't a story about me. It's not a story all about my father. It's partly, or largely, to begin with at least, a story about my grandparents and about finding them here. Now, we're a very modern digital organisation. So I welcome you if you want to tweet about this through the thing, feel free to do that, Instagram, whatever. But if you're going to tweet about it, please use this hashtag. It's just a very short one. It's only 109 characters, leaves you 31. You can say a lot, especially if you use emoji. But anyway, so this is the first part of the talk that I'm going to give, which is, how a leaky roof, a building fire, systematic racial discrimination, and an old Lotus Notes database helped me find my grandparents. It's a little bit like one of those murder mysteries. So you know what I'm talking about, Murder on the Orient Express. You kind of know how it's going to end. I will find my grandparents, but that's not the point, because it's kind of like a whodunit. How did I find them, and why did I find them? Okay, so let me take you through this first part. And my story actually started in this fantastic building, the National Library of New Zealand building here on Molesworth Street, on kind of my first day working in the Information Knowledge Services branch, 2nd of June 2015. I guess I was kind of This is a syndrome I'll call, oh gee, that's weird colouring, isn't it? Yeah, well, okay, they do need to adjust the projector. But I guess a lot of the time growing up, I really just tried to fit in, to be not Asian. In fact, I did have a lot of friends who said, Richard, we forget that you're Chinese. We don't even think of you as Chinese. And at the time when I was growing up, I guess I thought that's really cool. But now looking back, I wonder if they're a little bit colourblind, or, you know, and how does that make me feel now? But coming to work here, I realised these are great institutions, but do they have anything for me? Do they have anything for Chinese? I didn't really think they would. But I was wandering on upstairs in the Alexander Turnbull Library in the reading room, and I came across this drawer that had some photos from Wanyamata. I thought, that's fantastic. Some stuff from my hometown. And I found this photograph in the drawer, just loose, and it's a wonderful photo because it's taken inside the Wanyamata Mall at around the time that you know, I was growing up. And I particularly remembered Kerry's. I don't know if any of you know what Kerry's is, but it's a haberdashery. You know, I spent probably hours in there, or what felt like hours, with my mother, looking at buttons and zippers and fabrics and patterns, and it was the dullest place in the world. This, though, was not boring, because I get to play on there until the management would tell me to stop doing that. So I found that. Now, that was Wanyamata in its heyday. It's a little bit different now. You've probably sort of seen, you know, stories about this. That's where Kerry's with. There is a warehouse up there. But, you know, that's kind of changing. Wanyamata isn't quite the same vibrant place that it used to be, which is really, really unfortunate. Anyway, finding that picture got me to thinking, well, this is amazing, this is fantastic. Maybe there is stuff about, you know, Wanyamata, my family, you know, my heritage here in the collection. So I went to one of the terminals there and jumped on and did a little bit of searching. Not a Google search, but a National Library search. And I thought, well, let me find other pictures of Wanyamata and see what I might find there. So, and there's a little bit of, I did a bit of capture here so you can see what I actually saw. There's about 349 images, at least at that time, of Wanyamata. Well, there's a lot of photos, huh? And I saw this one in particular that really fascinated me, because this is the National Bank of New Zealand. My brother Colin's nodding. This is before the mall was built out over here. This thing here, I don't know if I have to press a button. There's a little ledge on the side there. I used to call that the ledge of doom because I spent felt like hours playing there. I should have been helping my mum and dad at the shop, but I was playing there, sort of on the ledge there, pretending that I was thousands of feet off the ground. So it was a really, really cool to see that there. It's changed a little bit. National Bank's been bought by ANZ. I'm surprised they haven't filled in that ledge or put barriers there for health and safety reasons. If you go a little bit to the left, you'll actually see what used to be our shop. It's now a Turkish kebab place. Back in the day, this is it here, it was Winery Fruit Mart. Fresh tastes best. My father was a marketing genius. He was. So this is where our shop was. Unfortunately, right next door was another store, was the TAB. And my father, he might have been a marketing genius, but he was not a financial genius. He had this plan where he would use the revenue from the shop and invest it at the TAB and get extraordinary rates of return, or so he believed. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and so I'm a public servant. If my father had spent a little bit more time being godly and not at the TAB, things might have been completely different. Anyway, that was an aside. So back to searching this. Wow, found a photo of the National Bank. That was fantastic. Wonder what other cool pictures I might find. And then I came across this one. This one's really cool. Woman working on the factory floor of Tatra Leather Factory, Wanyamata. This is significant because I knew that my grandmother, my dear grandmother, my mother's mother, had worked at Tatra Leather Factory. And so began, in real time, a conversation I had with my brother Stephen in Australia, trying to figure out what's going on here. Do you have any idea when she worked there? Yeah, late 60s, early 70s. Wow, cool. Oh, there's some photos here, but I don't think, I don't think she's in there. There's no pictures of her specifically. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe there is this person that looks like, she looks kind of Chinesey. And he said, send me a photo. So I did what any geek does. I didn't know you could share from the workstation, so I just took my phone up to the screen and took a photo, shared it with him. He said, that's her. Ha! That's her. You know, she's in there somewhere. Seriously? Yeah. Oh, man. So this photo, which is actually taken, and this is just complete luck, is taken by the same photographer that took the National Bank photo, a guy called Duncan Winder, who, upon his death, his estate donated a whole bunch of negatives to the Alexander Turnbull Library. And you can see my grandmother in there. You'll notice all the other ladies are kind of staring in their photo taking. She's working. I mean, that's an Asian, that is the Asian work ethic, like crazy. So, you know, OMG, that really was quite a moving moment. Remember, this is my first day on the job doing this stuff. And I have to admit, you know, I had a bit of a cry. And I've cried a lot at work, usually for the wrong reasons. This is for the right reason, okay? So, as I was saying, who done it? How did it get there? How did that happen? So let me just take you a little bit back in time to explain how that happened to be. So in 2009, some of you, if you're friends of the National Library, might know that we had to close up shop. We put a big wrapper and closed the doors, moved everyone out. And that was essentially to fix a leaky roof and to create more storage space in the repository downstairs. In 2012, we reopened this fabulous building, and it was completely, you know, revamped as it is now. And actually, we are in this little area there. So what happened between 2009 and 2012? Well, clearly a lot of work. We had people who installed a lot of shelving and space downstairs where we keep a lot of cool stuff, put up a lot of shelving because we're really good at putting boxes or putting things in boxes and putting boxes on the shelves. I've got a lot of photos of boxes and shelves. This is my favourite. It's a really good one, actually. And we spent some time doing digitisation. We took physical artefacts, we scanned them at very high resolution, and we had, well, we actually had more than that human's actually standing there, by the way. Ellen did that. And some of the photos that were digitised as part of that effort from 2009 to 2012, some of these great things. That, by the way, is I think it's like called it's a band rotunda, an ornamental rotunda. I just happened to read this yesterday, there's going to be an exhibition next year which is all about these upstairs. So if you're really into band rotundas, come back next year to the Turnbull Gallery and you'll see a whole exhibition on that. But also, during that time, this picture got digitised. Except that this picture didn't look like that. It actually looked like this. One of the image conservators or guys helped bring this out of the cold storage and showed it to me, and it's a tiny little negative, as you can see. And it's cellulosic film negative, which, if you look at it, you can't really, as a human being, make sense head nor tails because we don't sort of live in kind of negative space. So the transformation of that negative into a digital image was absolutely transformational and really important to me because I got to see my grandmother. And more importantly, we attached some metadata to describe that and we stuck both those bits online. So you could search and find that image. And also it was done at such high resolution that I was able to zoom in many, many times in order to find my grandmother right at the back. So that's the leaky roof bit, finding my maternal grandmother. So we're on to the next bit. Don't know if you know this building, Hope Gibbons building. Nowadays, it's the home of a fantastic sports bar. Best sports bar in New Zealand from 2008, 2011, then it kind of went downhill. They unfortunately had a really big fire in 1952. A whole bunch of government records were stored in that building during that time. This was one of the survivors. And it was really the impetus for the Archives Act of 1957, when the New Zealand government said, hey, we've actually got to look after this stuff. Sometimes it's records of government, sometimes it's records of New Zealand society, but we actually have to look after this stuff because this is important to New Zealand's heritage, to its present, and more importantly, to its future. That little guy was actually in a thing in the Dawn Post last year, and a great little story about it. And it talks about how we did lose a part of our nation's memory in that event, and we've worked really, really hard since that point to not let that happen ever again. So there we go, building fire. This photograph, poll tax, sorry, that was a joke, bad one. The poll tax, and that, well, you know, these comics probably say it all actually, and a lot of the clips from that time. There was a time in New Zealand in the late 1800s and early 1900s when Chinese people were not all that welcome to come and live here in New Zealand. A lot of those cartoons are actually held by the Turnbull Library, and actually the conservator for Māori, Paul Diamond, he lent me this book last year, Aliens at My Table, Asians as New Zealanders See Them. This is a fantastic book which sort of documents a lot of these cartoons and some commentary around what these things actually say or said about New Zealand at the time. And I have to say, after I read this book, I went into a deep funk and a bit of a depression for about a week when I felt really, really down about being a Kiwi. And actually, whoa, this isn't kind of what I thought New Zealand was all about. And this gentleman here in particular, which you might recognise, he stands outside of Parliament, Richard John Seddon. And I'd been taught when I went to primary school and high school that this guy was an amazing statesman of New Zealand. He was an amazing leader. He was a great man. When I walk past that now, when I walk past his thing, I kind of get a bit of a, I feel a bit angry actually. And I sort of look it up and I go, you dick, which I think is, you know, fairly earned. And actually a lot of things at that time, like here's a petition from some West Coast miners who weren't all that happy about getting Chinese coming to New Zealand and fearful of them stealing their jobs. And the sorts of words that were used, pernicious, injurious, predatory habits, uselessness to Europeans, thievish predilections. It was kind of like just, I guess, of that time, the sentiment of the population. And that led to that Chinese Immigrants Act of 1881 and the thing we now know as the poll tax. And the poll tax, I don't know if you don't know, here it is, in infographics. It basically said you could have one Chinese person come into the country at a cost of £10 per head for every 10 tons of cargo. So quite a hefty amount. That wasn't good enough, so in 1896 they raised that to one Chinese person at a cost of £100 per head for 200 tons of cargo. I mean, look at that. That's a rate of inflation that would make some South American countries' eyes water. Of course, you know, some historians have tried to figure out what that is in New Zealand dollars, and it's roughly about $18,500. But of course, it's pretty crass to kind of value someone in terms of dollars. So I've used a more universal unit, and I've worked out it's about 3,500 Big Macs, which makes me feel a lot better about myself. But the Chinese Immigrants Immigration Act was just one of a number of very systematic policies of discrimination against Chinese. And you can find this on Tiara, which is where I found that, which is New Zealand's online encyclopedia. And thankfully, in 1944, they repealed that. And of course, that led to an apology by the Labour government under Helen Clark. Thank you, Helen, and good luck with the United Nations thing. But it led to an apology and the establishment of a trust to administer a grant that was given back to the Chinese community to do cool things. She looks a lot better on my screen than she does on that slide, by the way. So there you go, systematic racial discrimination. Bit sad, but true, and it's just part of the New Zealand we're part of. The last part of this bit is around the old Lotus Notes database. Now, you don't need to know what a Lotus Notes database is, except to know it's a piece of software which you stick data in. You now know way too much about Lotus Notes. But we used to have a Lotus Notes database that was used by the Office of Ethnic Affairs to hold a whole bunch of records that had been entered into that database as part of the official apology to the New Zealand Chinese. And when that database was retired because the website was going to get redone, Office of Ethnic Affairs offered the database of content to the National Library and to National Archives. The chief archivist at the time said, well, those are records of government about New Zealanders. We should look after those. We'll put them into our care. And some archivists went through that information and they realised there was a treasure trove of stuff there. And they thought, well, we're going to list this stuff and we're also going to take some other materials that are associated with it and digitise them and make them available to New Zealanders. So this is a bit where, when you think about how to find things in the digital age, you often rely on names. And you might have heard before in my pepeha, I use this name Wong Akso, which is the name of my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. That was his kind of formal name. My brother Stephen, he found out through various connections that his kind of nickname, his more less formal name was Wong Jem, and he had used that quite often to go and search for records about my grandfather, Wong Akso, and he tried that, didn't find anything. He tried Wong Jem, couldn't find anything. And then over a casual conversation on Skype one evening, I said, well, you know, why people often misspell the names or they get the names all mixed up, it's really hard to get it right sometimes. Maybe it's just spelt Wong Jem and pronounced Wong Jem. Even the website for this talk kind of had it wrong because they kind of mixed up the Jim and the Wong and stuff. So anyway, you know, it's an easy mistake to make. So my brother Stephen and I were on Skype and I said, look, let me look him up in archives and see if I find anything. And I did a search using that spelling. It turned up a whole bunch of records. This one turned up, which is a digitized record. Wow, Wong Jem. And we looked at the dates. We thought, yeah, this seems right. Right age, right time. And this picture came up. This is my grandfather's poll tax certificate when he came into the country on the 29th of July, 1907. And on the back of that are these, his fingerprints. We don't know where his thumbs are. His fingerprints on the back side. And we see here the tally for the day. 2 Chinamen came in on that day and the £100 poll tax by my grandfather, Wong Jem, and his signature. So I was like, wow, but I know there's some other entries on that screen, so let me have a look at those. This is all happening in real time with my brother in Melbourne. And I was like, oh, what's this one? 1914, I wonder. Because, you know, it was not unusual for Chinese people to go back and forth between New Zealand and China to go see relatives and try and bring children back. And this is what I found when I clicked on that. And this was the first time that me or my brother had ever seen our grandfather. And this is that. So this was the other piece of information. This is from the sort of re-entry registration stuff. So when Chinese had to go out of the country, they had to register their identity details so that when they came back in, well, hopefully they wouldn't get charged the poll tax a second time, but probably more importantly, they let the right person in and not someone else who was posing as them. So that was a serious oh my God moment with my brother online. Now, you also might notice from this that we've got his thumbs. And a little bit like the Star Wars Cosmic Shells and Pokemon Go, you've got to collect them all. I mean, it's a really important thing. So for the very first time ever, I reunited my grandfather's fingers and thumbprints. That is not available in the archives or the library, but you know, it's here today. It's an exclusive. So there we go, an old Lotus Notes database helped me find my grandfather. So, part 2. So if this is my grandfather, or our grandfather, Wong Jem, Wong Akso, also known as Wong Jem, you might notice something a bit unusual, because this is my dad. And my dad goes by the name of Charles Cole Foy. And you go, yeah, why the Foy? I mean, why the Foy? And this is a question that has perplexed my brothers and I, my family, throughout our entire lives until quite recently. And it's something that, you know, it's like, why? And people would often ask me, and I say, oh, well, it's a simple story. You know, they took probably his Chinese name and they Romanized it and transliterated it, and, you know, you guys can't say Chinese names properly, and they mangled it, and that's how you come up with Foy. And it sounds very plausible, and you tell that story to yourself and you live with it. And you'd talk to your brothers about them. They're just as clueless as I was. And we could never get the story from our mum or dad. They never really explain it. So it was like, why the Foy? About 10 years ago, though, I heard about this story from World War II. It was just after D-Day and the landings in Normandy. And Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army. They were embroiled in a massive offensive and counter-offensives in the Ardennes Forest, sort of in Belgium, Luxembourg, trying to push back the Germans who were trying to push back into Europe. And there was a lot of fighting in this thing called the Siege of Bastogne as part of the Battle of the Bulge. But there was also a very small action in a small town. And that action was called the Foy action. Now, believe me, the words Foy and action are seldom used in a sentence together. So when you see that together, you think, wow, there's something serious going on. And here's a little town. And this little town was taken back by Easy Company, and there was quite a lot of loss of life on both sides. And it was actually told in episode 7 of Band of Brothers. So I was watching Band of Brothers, and you hear about it, and you see Foy, and I was thinking, whoa, Foy, this is fantastic. And this was a while ago, and I guess I wasn't very smart because the timing wouldn't have worked out, but I had these sort of romantic ideas that, yeah, maybe my forebears were, from the 101st Airborne Division, or maybe, we were the, children of, Belgian peasant farmers who were liberated from the Nazis by Easy Company. But Occam's razor prevails, and that's probably not the case at all. So, after a while, when you're growing up and you don't get answers to these questions, you sort of think, you just got to let it go and just accept the fact that Foy is Foy and really doesn't matter. And it didn't matter so much, I guess, until our dear father died in 2008. And then we instigated our own band of brothers, Band of Foy Brothers, and we made it kind of an annual ritual to get together as a set of 4 brothers, to spend some time together, to remember our father, but also to do the important things that brothers do, which is, eat out, drink a little bit, gamble, and also learn how to take the perfect selfie of ourselves. Oh, sorry, you won't recognise these people. Here we go. But no, my 3 older brothers, Les, Colin and Stephen, we, on an annual basis or every other year, we try to meet together in a city that's not where we live. So it's either in Sydney or in Auckland. When we're in Auckland, we go to visit my grandfather, Wang Jim's gravesite, and we give it a good clean up, because that's what good grandsons do. And usually, that involves a lot of cleaning by my brother Colin and Stephen, Stephen and Les, whilst Colin mucks around on his smartphone. Yeah. But 2 years ago, in 2014, I did what I don't usually do, which is I actually had a look around at some of the other plots. And we found this one. Well, I found this one. A few plots along, probably about 4 or 5 plots along from Wang Jim's. And this. What? Huh? And if you recall, my dad's name is Wong Kao Foy. And then, holy, what is going on? This can't be a coincidence. Why the Kao Foy? Why? And so quite a bit of panic ensues at this point, because I run over to Rose, like, you idiots! Oh, what have we been doing all these years? And of course, it's followed by the usual Cantonese exclamation, "Hey-ya! This is just crazy." My brothers, convinced me. No. We've had it checked out. We've looked at the inscription, because it's all in Chinese. We know that it's absolutely the right one. We can't explain that. We're not too sure. But the name, whether it's Wong Kao Foy or Charlie Kao Foy is really important. And that name and my father's identity is really important. And it's threaded through his entire life in the various documents that identified him, like his Chinese passport or his alien registration stuff, or when he became a New Zealand citizen and the date of birth, and in fact in his passport. And even when he left this mortal coil and left the world, he was still Charles Carl Foy. So it was obviously a really important thing to him, and he always said, you know, this is who he was, and didn't really want to talk about it. So who is Wong Carl Foy? A little bit of research by my brother Stephen on this found out about Wong Carl Foy, and he was, another Chinese immigrant who came to New Zealand. These are from a trip when he went back to China with his wife and his young daughter Ada and Victor. Keep your eye on Victor, he's going to make another secret appearance very soon. But this was kind of like where the trail went cold, where we knew that he'd come to New Zealand, he had children here, he took children back, but you know, what's the relationship to our dad? We couldn't figure it out. Well, now that I'd found some stuff about my grandparents and also found stuff about my dad, I started looking through the other stuff of archival material held by the National Archives. And this was a letter from my father really attesting to who he was as a New Zealander and that he would be fit to bring my mother into New Zealand from China. And in this, he refers to being in partnership with his brother, Victor Carl Foy, which my brothers told me he didn't have a brother called Victor Carl Foy. But that Victor Carl Foy is this Victor Carl Foy, right? We also, I mean, these letters are great. These are letters written, you know, this is in the 50s, and he says, you know, I was educated in New Zealand, which is true, he was educated in New Zealand, and, you know, he's gotten into the New Zealand way of life. Chinese way of living doesn't really suit him. He fooled the constable, because this is the constable's letter to the, I don't know, the inspector or whoever, and says, yeah, this applicant speaks the English language really well, because my father was absolutely fluent in English. He was also absolutely fluent in Siap Cantonese. And like his brother, Victor, does not associate with the other Chinese families in the district, as he is of the Christian faith, which is why, well, why didn't he go to that Assembly of God place? And lives according to the New Zealand standards. He is a good worker and dresses well. Sure. Oh, yeah, really? Yeah, okay. Because if that's the case, who did he play mahjong with? Okay, the other people in the bin? But, you know, in the end, I think he kind of summarized it. You know, he's not just any old Chinese. He's the better type of Chinese and a suitable type to be assimilated in the community. Sure, bro. Thank you very much. We appreciated that. So anyway, we established a link between our father and his supposed brother, Victor Carl Foy, even though it's not really, you know, it's not really his brother. So in preparations for this year's annual Foy Boy Weekend, and it was the Wongjim edition because we'd found all the stuff about my grandfather in the last 12 months, and so we wanted to go to Auckland, pay a special pilgrimage and homage to my grandfather, and try and find out everything about Wongjim, where he got off the boat, and trying to like really celebrate his coming to New Zealand. We knew that he was on the boat, the steamship Victoria, because that was on his poll tax certificate. We'd found through other records the fact that he was one of two gentlemen who came in on that boat. The boat was the SS Victoria. It looked like this. But where did he land? Well, talking to one of the archivists over at National Archives, he said, well, you know, you could maybe find that in the harbour records, but that's probably unlikely. You could look in the newspapers if you got a newspaper from 1907. And I thought, geez, it's not like I got any of those hanging around. Yes, we do. This thing called Papers Past, where we digitise a whole bunch of newspapers from way, way back, and they're all full text scanned and transcribed, and you can find this stuff online, a huge treasure trove of information from that day. And the 1907, 29th of July, which is a Monday, New Zealand Herald has, on this page, I think page 4, the shipping news, because this was really important back in those days. I mean, nowadays you just sort of, you know, Twitter, tweet that, Facebook it, Instagram it. But in those days you had to do it this way. And we know we had all these really important people because they had their kind of names written there. There were 38 steerage. My grandfather Jim would have been in steerage. We also know he came in with lots of potatoes and compressed fodder and peanuts and raisins and other stuff. But probably more importantly, we know that that boat, the steamship Victoria, berthed at Hobson Street Wharf. So a little bit more research by my brother in Auckland Council, finding the old engineering plans. And because Hobson Street Wharf does not exist. There's a Hobson Wharf, which is different, but the Hobson Street Wharf is no longer there. Hobson Street Wharf used to be here, which is today called Prince's Wharf. It was renamed in sort of 1920. So that was really cool. We learned, well, it's at Hobson Street Wharf. We'll have to go there and visit it and, you know, have a photo, take a selfie. But, you know, as part of one of these trips, my brother always organised the accommodation. Where did he book our accommodation? Of all places. Prince's Wharf. And we're just like complete luck. So, dumb luck. So the pinnacle, the culmination of that trip really was to go up to Archives New Zealand and actually come into personal contact with my grandfather's poll tax certificates and with his portraits. Because we'd seen these online, but we really wanted the opportunity to experience them face to face. And here we are looking at them. And I think, you know, I can only speak for myself. It's a really moving kind of thing to move from that digital experience into the physical dimension. To see the book, and it's a bit sad, but this is a poll tax butt receipt. So there's a whole bunch of records in here. It's in a bit of disrepair. Thankfully, it's been beautifully digitized. To see those up front, to touch it, to smell it. You smell the age of the paper, the age of the history. To taste it, well, you're actually not meant to taste it, but it's a little bit salty. But yeah, to really come into contact with that is a really quite a moving experience. At the same time, though, when we're up there, I realised there was some other stuff that we hadn't seen of Wong Kao Foy, and it was this alien registration file. So I thought, well, let me just pull that. Let's just get that. Complete, kind of like, why not while we're there? And this is what we found. We found reference to a Charlie Kao Foy as Wong Kao Foy's son. So this was the missing link that actually connects my father with that name. It is the missing link that provides the convergence of these two gentlemen's lives. Wong Jim, who is our father's blood father, and Wong Kao Foy, who was my father's paper father. So, you know, who is the real Charlie Kao Foy? Well, my dad would always say he was the real Charlie Kao Foy, because all his papers say that he is that. But actually he wasn't. You know, he was Wong Hing Fong. He was the blood son of Wong Jim, Wong Akso, and he was the paper son of Wong Kao Foy, a paper son. So we understand just from, you know, other sources that they most likely came from the very same village in Siyip or Siyi region, what's known as 4 counties. But, you know, why? Why was Dad a paper son? And a lot of this just comes down to the fact that it was very hard for Chinese men and women to bring their children to New Zealand back in those days. If you think about the climate at the time, the intense scrutiny put on our people. And Wong Kao Foy, you know, he went back and forth many times. Actually, so did our grandfather. And, you know, just kind of like had a hard life. And we came to learn a couple of weeks ago that Wong Kao Foy liked a little bit of the opium. And it's kind of a little bit sad. Well, it's quite sad. I don't know if he was particularly addicted or dependent, but he liked a bit of the opium. And to fund that opium recreation, he would take the identity papers of his deceased children, because he had a number of children, quite a few, and a number of them died in China, and he sold them to various people. I actually sometimes think that my brothers have some kind of opium addiction, actually, because there's a picture of them there, and then we go out, they're always like, they're asleep. Anyway, so how do we know? How do we know that he had this opium thing, that he did this, he sold these papers? Oh, it's kind of well known in the Chinese community, but it was kind of finally confirmed when we met Wong Kao Foy's birth grandson, Philip Lo Yim. This is in Auckland a couple of weeks ago. So that's Wong Kao Foy's real grandson by blood in a chain, and we're his paper grandsons, and some of our kind of old friends and relatives are actually, as it turns out, paper granddaughters, because their mum used another deceased child of Wong Kao Foy. So in the end, I mean, this has been a fantastic kind of little journey. Yep, my father was indeed a registered alien, because that was what the law said. He was indeed a paper son throughout his entire life, using the identity of a deceased Charlie or Charles Kao Foy, who we don't really know what he looks like, because it's just an identity that my father took on. But probably more importantly, throughout all our lives, he was our dad. Thank you.